This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Aloha, and welcome to the monthly public presentation of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Since 1990, the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii has been following our mission of promoting human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of vegetarian education, as we've grown to become one of the largest all-volunteer, nonprofit vegetarian societies in the nation. We'd like to encourage those of you who are not yet members, and even those of you who are not yet vegetarians, to join the Vegetarian Society tonight. You'll receive an informative newsletter, as well as discounts on Oahu, Maui, Kauai, and the Big Island at many vegan and vegetarian-friendly restaurants, businesses, and groceries, such as at down-to-earth, organic, and natural stores. You'll also be supporting events such as tonight's, which are not only made possible, but free to the community as well, through your membership dues and donations. As a Vegetarian Society of Hawaii member, you might also enjoy attending our now one-year-old Imagine a Vegan World support groups meetings at 6:30 p.m. every Tuesday night, except for this one, of course, at the Central YMCA across Atkinson Drive from Ala Moana Shopping Center. They will soon be having a fun Christmas get-together too. So please see Terry Bear for details about both the meetings and this holiday event. We also have a very popular social event, which is our monthly dine-outs with our speaker of the month. At this time, I'd like to thank some of our hardworking volunteers. We have Dr. Fred Foster at the reception table, Sarah and Patrick at the free literature table. Yes, they're wonderful. We have Dr. Bill Harris, who is our videographer tonight, and he is always the producer of our shows, which I think you've been watching also on vsh.org or on Alelo. We've got Dr. Carl Seff there, UH Professor Emeritus of Chemistry, who does most of our meeting tasks. Matt here? Hi, Matt. He's our Facebook administrator. Anyway, if you would like to join these great volunteers in doing something positive for the world, please see us tonight. We're recording tonight's presentation for broadcast on the VSH TV series Vegetarian, which appears on public access channels across the state, including on Oahu's Olelo Channel 55 on Wednesday mornings at 11 a.m. and on some Thursdays at 6 p.m. You can also view videos of this and many of our past presentations on our website, www.vsh.org. where you'll find many other resources, including our famous dining guide. It is now time for our special guest. We're delighted to welcome H. Lorrin Lau, MD, MPH. Dr. Lorrin Lau is an MD, MPH, or physician scientist, the new concept in medicine at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. A native of Honolulu, he received his medical degree in 1958 from the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and his Master's of Public Health at Johns Hopkins in 1971. He has done basic research at Harvard, the Johns Hopkins School of Hygiene and Public Health, now named after Bloomberg, the NIH Post-doctoral Fellow programs, and food research in the Dole Pineapple laboratories. Since 1982, when he and his wife Maureen moved back to Hawaii, he has focused on preventive services for women's health in Hawaii, putting into practice what he has learned from his research experiences and inventions. Dr. Lau's presentation tonight is entitled The Search for Truth About Plants, Animals, and Better Human Health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lorrin Lau.
Now, at the conclusion of this talk, I emphasize 3 points. Number 1, prevention. Prevention is the only thing that works in medicine and in life. There is no such thing as cure. And what are we trying to prevent? We're trying to prevent heart attack, strokes, cancer, and other things that will most likely affect your health. The secret of disease prevention is plants. Number 2, I should not use the word meats. I should use the words animals and animal products, because eating animals and animal products is dangerous, harmful, and contributes to serious illnesses like heart attack, stroke, cancers, and death. Number 3, the search for truth should be conducted by you yourself. Don't believe anything or anyone, not even what I tell you tonight, because things change all the time. Now, what I'm going to do tonight is tell you a series of stories about what I have seen, and tell you a series of stories about people who have found things that will improve your health. So this is storytelling. The first thing is that many years ago, I realized that I did not know what Veritas meant, and yet it's in the logo of many universities. Veritas means truth, and the search for the truth is not easy. I want to show you that I anticipated things going wrong, and when I got up here, I got this picture, which I did not put in. But in searching for the truth, I finally think I've discovered what Veritas means. For example, when a patient walks in with serious bleeding or serious pain, I have to search for the truth and find out the cause of the bleeding and the cause of the pain. And I don't have all the time in the world because there's patients waiting in the waiting room. And I have to take care of the search for the truth and take care of the patient right away. Just as important as searching for the truth in these patients with pain and bleeding is searching for the truth about these things. When I was raising my family, there wasn't much food research, and I was told that you should feed your kids as much meat as possible to make them strong and to give them protein. Now, this is actually very harmful, and some of my children are banner vegetarians, and others still are practicing what I taught them, is to eat all the meat you possibly can. Another thing we hear is drinking orange juice and cow milk. And Terry Shintani will tell you, don't drink the fruit juice, eat the whole fruits. About cow milk, we'll talk about that later. Another thing that we've heard is hormones cause cancer. And this is very harmful because this is not true, and I'll elaborate on this. The other thing that we hear, obstetricians telling patients, is that being a vegetarian is not good during pregnancy, and you should eat fish and meats during pregnancy, otherwise your baby is abnormal. We know that is not true. So the title of my talk is The Search for Truth, Veritas, about plants, animals, and better health. The goal of this lecture is better human health, and the activities towards this goal include prevention, research, meetings or symposia or gathering of the expert minds, and education or teaching. Now, I use the word search in the sense of the word meaning. Did you know that there are 26 meanings to the word C-S-E-E? And the word truth is complicated. There's actual truth, perceived truth, and there's denied truth. In preparing for this lecture, I discovered that there are certain themes. One is to show you things that are new, interesting, that you've never heard before. The second is to emphasize it's not only what you eat, but how, and to emphasize that what you eat is what you become. And as I go through my stories, I want you to judge whether what I'm talking about is good or bad. And the way we're going to cure illnesses, and there's no such thing as cure really, is by education, and education is reinforcement and repetition, so I'll try to practice those things as I talk. The real reason I'm giving this is to thank the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, its founders and its volunteers who don't even want to be named. We come here to listen to people, to learn what to eat and how to improve our health. And the Vegetarian Society has had tremendous impact on me since I've been here in Hawaii. It's had a tremendous impact on my patients and my practice, and I'm going to illustrate this to you. But one thing I realize is that this audience here is above average in smarts. Not everybody can be a vegetarian because it takes knowledge and intelligence, and to be a vegan, it takes even more knowledge and more intelligence. So what I'm going to talk about now is what I have learned from the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii and how it's impacted me, my practice, and my patients. I heard that Japan had a very low incidence of breast cancer, prostate cancer, heart attack, stroke, and hypertension. And Mr. Himura said, did you know there was a law in Japan, a national law, that prohibited the eating of meats and fish? And Jake, who is here tonight, and Mr. Himura provided me with the documentation, and here it is. You see the number 678 AD, the Japanese people did not eat meat and they did not eat fish. And I asked Jake earlier, were they more vegetarian or more vegan? And we think they were more vegan. But this practice continued for over 1,200 years. And if you want to know why, I think there's two reasons. One, they did not eat meat or fish, and I'll go into the dangers of that later. But also, they research and practice green drinks. Another benefit that I had is my wife at that table over there got a brochure about diabetes. The principles in this brochure from the table over there give you principles very much like Dr. Shintani has in his books. And actually, by practicing those principles, I can lose 10 pounds in 10 days, and I'm on that right now. Or as Shintani says, lose 30 pounds in 3 weeks. Many people don't believe that, and I was skeptical when I first heard it, but it's very true. The second thing that I was surprised with, this is a new approach to diabetes in this paper. And look what it says. Number 1, begin a vegan diet, avoid animal products. Since when did they start saying that? And one of the new things in the last 2 years is that at Harvard School of Public Health, a doctor has now shown a direct link between diabetes and meats. Again, I should say animals. Another interesting thing is this book that they gave me from the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, and I won't mention his name by request, but again, I admonish you, don't believe everything you read or see. But I did find something very interesting on the cover. And on the cover, it talked about beer versus cow milk. So I ask you, is it better to feed your kids cow milk or beer? Don't laugh, because in Europe, in some countries, they give their kids wine and beer. And if you're an adult and you don't want to get heart attack, stroke, or hypertension, should you be drinking beer or cow milk? Now, beer is plant, and we compare the same amounts. For instance, beer has less than half the calories that cow milk does. And beer, which is a plant, has no fat compared to cow milk, which has considerable amount of fat. And beer has moderate alcohol. And before you condemn alcohol, wait until I get further. Now, we drink more cow milk than we drink beer. So I ask you again, is it better to drink beer versus cow milk? And even for diabetics, I'll tell you right now, due to some of the experiments that we've been doing at home, I think it's better to drink beer. So I'm going to start my storytelling now, and in typical Chinese fashion, I'm going to do it backwards. So we're going to start with the present time, when I came to Hawaii in 1982, and to the present time. And when I left Johns Hopkins and Harvard, you could not do what you wanted to. You could not do full-time practice. So I was doing administration, teaching, research, et cetera, et cetera. So when I was exposed to full-time practice, which I wanted to do, and put some of my inventions into practice, the first thing I came out is the effects and the diseases that I was encountering in my office. So the number one killer in the United States is what? Right, heart disease and stroke. And what does it mean by number one killer? How frequent is this? The other thing I was exposed to is T. Colin Campbell and Terry Shintani, and at the same time, the Genes to Society, or the Human Genome Project, erupted. And seeing all this disease now in a full-time practice, I said, was it always this way? Were people always obese? Did they have so much heart attack and stroke all the time? And was it like this before? So my next series will go back to the beginning and address what happened in the old days. So this is an old Time magazine slide, and the number one killer of women is not breast cancer, it's heart attack and stroke. And the incidence, believe it or not, is above age 25. 1 in 2 women will die of heart attack and stroke. Is this true? Do you believe it? Now I do, because we see it. So my wife comes to me and she says, I called so-and-so to remind her of her appointment, and they said she died of a sudden heart attack or stroke. What causes this? If you look at this picture here, you see a coronary artery, and you see in the bottom right corner, there's a dark zone, and that's dead heart tissue caused by a clot or a clogged artery. And the reason that's clogged up is from meats or animals. So at the top you see a clear artery, and progressively this cholesterol, or these cholesterol plaques, accumulate till the hole gets small. When the hole gets small, you have hypertension or high blood pressure, because you need a higher head of pressure to force the blood through to get enough oxygen to the brain and heart. If the heart gets clogged up, it's heart attack. If the brain gets clogged up, it's called a stroke. Now, the next thing I want you to know is what a pencil clot is. So if you look at that red coronary artery, if there's a clot in there of cholesterol, and cholesterol is a fat, and fat is yellow, what you do when you cut that open and you make a linear incision, out pops a pencil clot, or a clot looking just like a pencil. So again, we're talking about the years 1982 to 2013. And the next thing I was exposed to by my daughter is the China study. Now, I'm not going to go into the China study, except to say that this introduced me to the brother-sister cancers, prostate and breast cancer, and it introduced me to colon cancer. But most of all, it introduced me to the concept of dioxin, the strongest poison in the world. So at this time in Hawaii, we saw more and more articles about how breast cancer is limited to meats and how meats are related to colon cancer. Now I want you to look at this next picture very carefully, because this shows the effect of dioxin on the face. Putin reputedly tried to kill this Ukrainian leader by feeding him dioxin, which is the strongest poison in the world. And look at his skin. In 2 years, he went from young to old. He went from clear skin to dark skin. And now I swear that when my patients walk in, I can tell just by looking at their face whether they're meat eaters or plant eaters. The meat eaters do not have healthy skin. Their skin is mottled, is sallow, it's got all kinds of spots on it, just like the picture on the right, and it's just not healthy, whereas plant eaters have perfect skin. Now, even more important than the effects of the skin, and this effect on the skin is called chloracne. Remember that. Even more than the skin, it seems to affect the brain. So in 2006, the University of California says that dioxin kills or damages brain cells, and if a woman eats a hamburger and gets pregnant in the next 7 years, it's actually 10 years because dioxin lasts that long, her baby could have a lower IQ than a baby born about the same time in China or India where they don't eat meat. Now, I could elaborate on this, but we don't have enough time. I'm going to stop on dioxin for just a minute. So it's one of the strongest poisons known to man. And this subject erupted in November of 2012 because the EPA had kept this a secret. And there was an article in the Star Advertiser that everybody thought was just another article on the Vietnamese War, and they did not pay attention to it. But what it said is that Vietnam was claiming that the United States was causing breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer in Vietnam. Since then, the EPA has revealed some of its reports, but the main report is still not forthcoming. In preparing this lecture, certain links began to appear to me. One is that this subject, instead of calling it dioxin, I'd like to call it halogenated hydrocarbons, where chlorine, atom, bromine, etc. are very potent things. And I helped to develop pregnancy tests, and what I did is I used my experience from Harvard to develop a covalent bond between the antigen and the tumor indicators. Now, to make this more relevant to you, I'll tell you, do you remember when latex paint first came out and it rained and the latex paint ran off? And do you remember the days where you had to separate colored from white clothing to keep them separate or the colors would blend? Well, you don't have to do that anymore because now covalent bonding attaches the color or the things to the particles. One of my suite mates, my first year of Harvard, was Lamont DuPont Copeland, and he's never thanked me for helping him increase his industry because now the latex paint is bonded to the wood or metal and it doesn't come off. Also, I realized that there was a tie-in between what T. Colin Campbell was reporting and my research at Harvard, which I'll cite about mercuric chloride. Remember, I'm using chlorine in all these words. And mercuric chloride is the only thing that killed heat-resistant spores. And where else chlorine appears is in Clorox. Use it to sterilize, use it to bleach. And in using my bonding agent, I learned that if I got even a micro dot on the back of my hand, I would develop a tumor there. So this thing is very, very potent. And would you be eating this substance? Would you be eating Roundup, the weed killer that you use in your yard? Would you be eating DDT? And yet they're all the same. So the next thing I was exposed to was Shintani. Shintani has helped me. He's helped me lose my weight. His claims are correct. I have greatly reduced my diabetes medicines and my other medicines. Because he's done me a favor, I'd like to do Shintani a favor. So there's more than reducing your weight to help your cardiovascular problems. And that is the subject of cancer of the womb or cancer of the uterus. Now, I'm sure that when Shintani was working on his subject, he was not thinking of young, thin people like this, and he wasn't thinking of older, thin people like this. He was probably thinking of more heavily endowed people like this or like this. And what I would like to tell Dr. Shintani is that it's even more important than ever to help these people lose weight, because if they don't, they are certain to get cancer of the uterus. And I know how to prevent cancer of the uterus now, and I'll talk more about it. These slides I'll come back if necessary. This is part of a book we helped to write, and the Johns Hopkins Atlas of Anatomy. So the other thing that happened in these years, 1982 to now, is Victor McCusick, a very close professor of mine. He's labeled the father of medical genetics, and he founded the Human Genome Project, was a complete mapping of the genes of the human beings, and all the genes together are known as the genome. Now, to illustrate this to you, I'd like to use Angelina Jolie and Kathy Bates as an example. So here's a picture of chromosomes. And the chromosomes are messages to our body. It tells our body what to do, like make blonde hair and make blue eyes. And the whole ticker tape, this is a ticker tape, spelled, but instead of 26 letters, it's only spelled in 4 letters, A, C, T, A, and G. And if any 2 of them are misplaced, it's called a mutation. If any of the genes, a gene is a part of a chromosome, if any part of it is destroyed by oxidative damage or any type of damage, the message is misspelled and we make abnormal cells called cancer cells. So, for example, if you eat animals or animal products which are strong oxidant destroyers, you will affect the 3 genes for the breast cancer, which are like 13. And if you destroy or injure chromosome 13, you will get a type of breast cancer called ductal. If you hurt chromosome 17, you will not only get breast cancer, you will get ovarian cancer. And if you hurt oxidatively damaged, that is, chromosome 16, you will not only get ovarian cancer, but you'll get endometrial cancer and you'll get breast cancer. And I think this is what Angelina Jolie had. So, as you know, Angelina had her breast removed and her ovaries removed, and I hope she had her uterus removed. And the other person who fits into this category is Kathy Bates of Harry's Law. Kathy Bates, first of all, got ovarian cancer, and then she got ovarian cancer. Now, this can be very complicated, and I like to use the term BS, standing for be simple. So I make it into two columns, oxidants and antioxidants. And on the left you see the antioxidants, which are plants, but notice that hormones are there too. And notice at the bottom of this column it says no cancer. On the right you see oxidants, and oxidants causing oxidative damage can be animal products, radiation, and other things there. And at the bottom of this list you see cancers. Okay. Now, how important are antioxidants? Antioxidants actually correct the misspelling of damaged chromosomes, but this little paragraph illustrates the power of antioxidants. And what I'm trying to emphasize here, resveratrol in red wine and genistein in plants kill rapidly dividing cells and eliminating cancer cells, and antioxidants are potentially better chemotherapeutic agents than ones currently used. So instead of using these strong chemicals, we can use natural products like plants. So this is what I've been reading the last 30 years, celebrating its 30th anniversary, called Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, and there's many new words like proteomics, epigenetics, and et cetera, et cetera. So now remember, in this era I'm seeing a lot of patients, a lot of diseases, a lot of deaths. I'm saying to myself, where did all this obesity come from? Has it always been this way? And so now I'm going back to the start of my lecture and tell you those stories. So 1930 to 1950, Japan had a no-meat law, and immigrants coming to Oahu, Chinese and Japanese, had virtually no cancer, no heart attack, no stroke. Immigrants coming here had two ambitions. One is to speak English like Americans, so they didn't have a foreign accent, and their second ambition was to be more American and have enough dollars to buy and eat meats like Americans. My grandma Lee was very poor. As a boy, she took me to Kahala Beach and showed me how to hunt for seaweed, and that was, I think, for me, the beginning of so-called green drinks. And she almost ate no plants, and she lived to 99 years old. But her children, and she had many children, 9 or 10, all of them achieved their goals. They spoke perfect English, they got money, they ate a lot of meats, and they died young. Heart attack, heart attack, heart attack, heart attack, heart attack. My grandma Lau was very rich. She ate mainly plants, but she was able to eat a little more meat. She influenced my life and has influenced the lives of others. Now, it was very peculiar. We had a very strong bond. I don't know how we were very close. She spoke Chinese, I spoke English, but we understood each other. My father Henry was the youngest son of 11. He was her favorite son, and I was her favorite grandchild. And she spoiled me, because I remember as a little boy, she had a jewelry box about that thick, and she let me scoop my hands in and play with all these gems. And what I like most of all is getting the gold and squishing the gold. There's nothing like this. When you have gold in your hand and you squish it, I must have destroyed thousands of dollars worth of gold leaf. Even though she was wealthy, she made me slippers out of newspapers, and she made me a Chinese comforter with Chinese silk on it, which lasted till my last day at Harvard, and then it disintegrated. We were very close. Don't know, every time when I was going to visit her, I wondered, how come we're so close and we understand each other when we have difficulty speaking to each other? But that was true. So the last 6 years of her life were very painful for me, because she would get into hemorrhages of bleeding and have to be admitted to the hospital again and again. And as she got on in years, she had bigger bleeds and had to be admitted more often. In those days, transfusion was rare, so I don't think she received any transfusions, and she got weaker and weaker, and she died from uterine cancer, cancer of the womb. Of course, this affected me. It affected me in more ways than once. And I told myself, someday, if just someday, I could help her and other women like her, I would like to do that. So, to make a long story short, the history of progesterone began at Johns Hopkins. In 1938, Howard Jones and Ruth Wade, in working with oxidative phosphorylation, postulated the existence of progesterone long before it existed. George Corner worked on its physiology, and many years later, it was named progesterone in a London pub by 3 men, one of whom was from Maryland. In those days, we could not measure progesterone. Herbert Strand had used a gravimetric method to measure pregnant diol, which is a metabolic, but it reflected progesterone levels. And then I was lucky enough with my team to come along and invent progesterone. And again, to make a long story short, progesterone is used to treat uterine cancer, but actually it can prevent uterine cancer, because as long as a woman, no matter how obese she is, has progesterone, she cannot get uterine cancer. So for these very obese women in Hawaii, the chances of their getting uterine cancer is almost 100%, because the adipose or fat tissue makes excess androstenedione, which makes excess estrogen, but the excess estrogen does not cause the cancer as long as they have progesterone. But many people do not have the progesterone, so they get uterine cancer. So Dr. Shintani, it's very important for these women to lose weight, and while they're trying to lose weight, I put them on progesterone, and their bleeding stops. Like my grandmother, they bleed and bleed and bleed. The progesterone stops the bleeding, prevents the cancer. But then if they get tired of taking it, they'll get uterine cancer. So the contribution that my grandmother and our relation had is that now I can say we can prevent uterine cancer. And all these years I've been in practice, I do not have a single case of uterine cancer. I'm going to tell you a special story about my grandmother. She's on the left. My grandfather was fairly wealthy. She wasn't exactly thin. And this story that I want to tell you takes place on the El Alion market, which is featured where the green drapes are. And the top of this building still bears his name. And this picture was taken on a moving car. My son David drove around the corner, and I snapped this picture from the back seat the other day, and his market was in there. And remember, this is the early 30s, and he had the biggest grocery store at that time. Down the middle of King Street here, there were railroad tracks, and one wet, rainy night, my mother and her sister were crossing this road, and this streetcar struck my mother when she was pregnant. She went into labor, she was taken to Queens Hospital, and I was born. Now, in this grocery store, I remember very clearly my grandmother was sitting on an orange crate, and the salesman came in. Remember, this is 1930, and my mother had said, if a canned goods is swollen, don't eat it because you could get ptomaine poisoning. So the canning industry, they were called tin cans at that time, and it gave genesis to the term Tin Can Alley. Tin cans were not what they are today. So this salesman comes in, my grandmother's sitting on this orange crate, and he says, "Mrs. Lau, have I got a deal for you? You'll be rich." He says, "The Matson boat just brought in this whole batch of extra big cans, and because you are a big customer, because you have the biggest grocery store, we're going to give it to you at a reduced price. So you'll be very rich and make a lot of money. In these cans you have more corn and beets and carrots and stuff like this." And he said, "What about it?" He said, "In fact, you're such a good customer, I'll give you a special discount." There was silence. She didn't say anything. And all the time I could say, oh, he's thinking that my grandmother is a dumb Chinese woman who... He says, "In fact, I'll sell you the whole shipment. You'll make a lot of money." Again, there was silence. Finally, my grandmother's lower jaw quivered as I've seen it before, and resolutely she said, "Bullshit." And that's where I learned BS, but I translate BS to mean be simple. So oxidants versus antioxidants. The next phase of my life was at Harvard, and the first night I got there, it began to snow. I've never seen snow. I ran down to the Harvard yard, and I was arrested promptly by a Harvard cop. He was Irish, and he said, "Take that scarf off your neck and wrap it around your feet, and where are you from?" I told him, and then he said something. He said, "I want you to remember something, young man. Never eat eggs. They'll give you heart attack and stroke." Well, I just graduated from high school. I didn't know what a heart attack or stroke was, but I remembered what he said. The other things I'm going to tell you these things about Harvard. One of the things that I do want to tell you about before I go on is at MIT and Harvard, we did a research project on chlorella, which I started actually in high school. And I want to tell you the story about spinach and oatmeal. And I'm going to tell you about these men. So the first man I want to tell you about is I.E. Richards. The next day I went to class and I met I.A. Richards, who was a dialectic. Started Webster's Dictionary. He trained the paratroopers and the ski troopers in World War II, but his main thing was you have to understand words, and if you understand words and you realize that in every language there's different words for feelings and emotions. Some languages have few words for feelings and emotions, and other languages have not. But this was his main point. If you understand the meaning of meanings and people understand each other, there is no war. And that you can prevent wars, and this is good for your health. So he wrote the book, Meaning of Meanings, and he's the one in this book, which you can't get anymore, that tells you the 26 SEE. And believe it or not, but I'm using all 26 meanings tonight, and you may not realize that I'm doing it. You see what I mean? Great teacher. This is Kenneth V. Tiemann. He taught me plant physiology. He discovered the plant growth hormone, and he put me in charge of a secret project in biological warfare called heat-resistant spores. To make that relevant to you, you know about anthrax spores. But the one I was working with was dangerous because it was getting on the walls, the ceiling, the lab benches. It was interfering with the research on the Krebs tricarboxylic acid cycle, and we couldn't kill it except by mercuric chloride. Again, mercuric chloride, okay, is the only thing that could kill these spores. And while I was working on this project, I came up to a problem. I said, Dr. Tiemann, I can't tell whether these things are living or dead. I said, I've looked up the word life, I've looked up the word death, and I can't define life, I can't define death. So he said, you've got to read everything in the literature way back to the days that the world began. And I did, and we still could not find a meeting. So I said, well, now how do you search for the truth? If you can't get the answer any other way, what do? And the answer is you call a symposium, a meeting of the minds. So it took us more than a year, and we invited the greatest minds from all over the world to come to Harvard for 3 days to meet, and the conclusion was we cannot define life or death. We use this as a basis of transplant of organs, right? The organs are still living. My son Mark in Oklahoma stops the heart, they operate on it, it gets the heart going again on about 4 people every day. Are they dead? No, they're not dead. And I dare say there's people in this room who have been declared dead because their heart stopped beating, and they're sitting in this room tonight very much alive. So we cannot define death. What about life? We can't define life either, and that's why all the state legislatures are having trouble passing abortion laws, because they can't tell you when life begins. What is life? What is death? So one of the ways to search for the truth when all else fails is to call a symposium and gather the minds to think about it. Louis Fieser was my organic chemistry teacher, and Louis and his wife Mary had Siamese cats. And you see the bomb on the bottom there? That was napalm. And during the Second World War, the Axis powers would give their right arm to find out what napalm was. Na in the napalm stands for sodium, and P stands for palmitic acid, or from the palm trees. And the fats in the palm trees are of such great potency that they explode. Now the next topic, and I'm almost finished here, is when I first got to Hopkins, in 1 week, there were 5 cases of silent myocardial infarctions. Do you know what that is? Silent, no pain, heart attacks. And all 5 people, young faculty members, the only symptom they have, no pain, they were tired, they came to Hopkins, and they died there. So the law is, with sudden death, you need an autopsy, and I was asked to help on one of the autopsies, and I said, what are we looking for? And he said, a pencil clot, and I said, what's that? And you saw the picture of pencil clot. So we made an incision over the coronary artery, and out popped this yellow clot. Now at that time, I was too immature and naive. I should have asked, where did that clot come from? And clearly, it's from eating animals and animal products. I'm going to talk about Paul Talladay, John E. Howard, T.B. Turner, and then I'll talk about progesterone and etc. So here's Talladay. Talladay is professor of pharmacology, and he's the first one to ask, how does estrogen and progesterone work? And the answer is an electron transporter. But more recently, Paul Talladay discovered and patented broccoli sprouts, which have 8 or more times the antioxidant activity of adult broccoli. And so now you can buy Johns Hopkins broccoli at Safeway and at Times and markets. I almost guarantee that if you go completely vegetarian and you eat a lot of it is impossible for you to get cancer. Now the next story is very interesting. In the Midwest, there were wealthy farmers whose kids were getting rickets. This is where they lose the minerals from their bones and they get bow-legged, their bones are brittle, they break their bones. These were from rich farmers in the Midwest. So they referred the problem to the United States government. The Department of Agriculture gave it to us. And the first thing we discovered is that you eat spinach for its chlorophyll. But the chlorophyll in spinach is very peculiar. It contains phytol. The reason you eat spinach and oatmeal is for the sugar. But the sugar is very unusual. It's called inositol. What we find out that if it's got an H, as you see at the top, it's called inositol. If it's got a phosphate ester, it's called phytic acid. But if it binds a lot of calcium, magnesium, and other minerals, it's called phytin. And this is what was happening in the wealthy farm families in the Midwest. The kids were being fed spinach and oatmeal every day. So by definition, this was labeled a poison for kids, and it was withdrawn from the cafeterias of MIT and Harvard. This is about 1952. Now the same thing, if it's bad for kids, it might be good for adults, because if you take out the calcium, magnesium, you can't get kidney stones. And I've been amazed in Hawaii when I ask my patients, oh, you've had kidney stones, they've been treated, has your doctor told you what you can do to prevent kidney stones in the future? No. Well, you don't have to take expensive medicines, just take your oatmeal every day. Now, this is 1952, and when I went to Johns Hopkins, John Eager Howard, Civil War fame, his father was a Civil War hero and became governor of Maryland. Many years later, John Eager Howard Jr. took the credit for inventing the method to prevent kidney stones. For some reason, he forgot the research we did in 1952. This is T.B. Turner. T.B. Turner, you would expect him to do research on TB, and he did. He was a professor in the School of Hygiene and Public Health, but he became dean of our medical school. And I think he was a teetotaler, and he did a large project to show, I think, that he was out to show that alcohol was bad for you. But like T. Colin Campbell, his research backfired on him, and the results were that no alcohol is bad, too much alcohol is bad, but moderate alcohol is very good for you. It's good for your health and prevents cardiovascular disease. So in searching for the truth, your experiment can backfire. Ralph Heineke is a good friend of mine. He studied plant physiology and later noni. He's called the father of noni. And he was the genius behind my research at Dole. So he was a plant physiologist and a biochemist. So let me tell you some of the things that we found. We were entrusted with a job of finding a use for discarded pineapple roots or stumps, as it's called. And the first thing we got from these discarded roots or stumps was huge quantities of vitamin C. And I remember walking into the warehouse in Igualay Street and seeing a huge mound of white powder, which is vitamin C. We sold it to a drug company, and it dropped the price of vitamin C so that you can buy vitamin C at very reasonable prices. The name of the enzymes in this stump is called bromelain. It's a very powerful enzymes, and it's been developed to treat burns. It's been used to treat infertility. There's been considerable research done at Queens where they've forgotten about, and I'd like to reintroduce. It's used to clear beer. Before we started using bromelain to clear beer, all beer was cloudy. It's used as meat tenderizers. It's used as ion exchange resins, and it's used to clear your drains. Now, again, Ralph had the sharpness to pay attention to detail. So we used steam vacuum distillation, where we removed the water from the pineapple juice, but then in reconstituting the juice, we found that some people were stirring it vigorously and creating a lot of bubbles. Those bubbles are in fact the vitamins, and when those bubbles break, you destroy the vitamins. So Ralph had us study the natural fruit, the juice, before we steam vacuum distilled it, and then the way you reconstitute the juice. And what he found that if it was beat up very vigorously, you destroy the vitamins. So when you reconstitute your frozen juices, avoid bubbles. Now I know that a lot of you like to juice things, but again, if you get bubbles, you're destroying the vitamins. So your juicer and reconstituting should avoid bubbles. So that should improve your health. So this is one of the papers that we did to show how potent the enzymes are in pineapple. Now the other thing that we found out about pineapples, and I don't know why Dole didn't take advantage of it, is that it's a natural product to lower your bad cholesterols. So one of the things that I've come up with is, like Shintani says, don't drink the juice, eat the whole product. Why aren't we eating more fresh pineapple with the strong enzymes? It'll help arthritis, it'll lower heart attacks and strokes, and we improve the island economy. But Dr. Lilienfeld found out that lung cancer is not the first cancer you get. What is the first cancer you get from smoking? And the answer is bladder cancer. And I'm going to show you the results of this. Then I'm going to talk about our research on hormones and cancer, an article in the New England Journal of Medicine to show that smokers have more cotinine and nicotine in their bladder, whereas non-smokers don't have any. So if you tell the patient you'll knock out your cilia, you get bladder cancer, which is very hard to detect, and I've seen a lot of this in Hawaii, they're more motivated to change smoking, and I have people quit smoking. Now, when it comes to the rumor about hormones and causing breast cancer, the first thing I noticed is that all my research showed not a single research paper that proved that hormones cause cancer. The other thing is my data analysis showed that without hormones, shown at the top of the slide, you get more breast cancer than with hormones at the bottom. At the bottom, with estrogen and progesterone, there's only 67 cases of breast cancer per 100,000, whereas on the top, there's hundreds of cases. So this is what caused me to want to work on this project. So first of all, no research showed proof. Second, all the research samples were small, there were no controls, and none of them followed the rules of causation, especially Koch's postulates, and there was no mention of measurement of hormones. None of the papers that talk about hormones causing breast cancer, for example, have a single measurement of hormones. Not even the Women's Health Initiative, and I know all about that, that's a separate story. It was actually started by Steve Nakajima, who was promoted and went from California to Kentucky. So I presented this to the NIH, and they were rather shocked, and they said, why don't you apply for a grant and do research on this? So at first we got $4 million, and it escalated to $14 million. We had a multidiscipline team, the best in the United States. It went from 10 years to 14 years. We did the project in Hagerstown, Maryland, which has a low immigration and emigration rate. We used match controls, and at the end of this study, we found that hormones did not cause cancer. It was actually the lack of hormones, and the presence of hormones actually prevent cancer. Now, you may not realize this, but I've got a cost. There's a cost of being a vegetarian. There's a cost of trying to be good. There's a cost of doing research. The $14 million went to the research. It did not come to the investigators. And me and my family, we lived on $4,000 a year, all those years, in abject poverty. We qualified for welfare. So what did we find after we found out that hormones do not cause cancer? We found out that hormones prevent cancer. A woman needs her hormones. When she loses her hormones, she gets PMS, she gets old. You want her to stay young, you want her skin and heart to stay young, you give her hormones. For atrophy, there's dryness, discomfort, pain, marital discord, divorces. For bones, you need hormones to prevent osteopenia and osteoporosis. And the brain, you need hormones to prevent Alzheimer's. So again, here's the research, and I have to pay tribute to George Comstock, who died about 2 years ago. We're blessed at Johns Hopkins with a bevy of good epidemiologists. You can see this study is large, 13,000 people, and you can see in the middle of the paper that we measured all those hormones, match controls. We had blood frozen in Baltimore and in Hagerstown with super duper freezers. But let me tell you about George Comstock. In all my previous studies, I collected 2,000 bits of items on each patient and 1,000 bits of information on each patient. And George comes along, and he's one of the best. I said, we have a lot of epidemiology. And he said, no, we'll just get it down to 6 bits of information. I said, how can you do that? But George Comstock was extraordinary. And so now let me tell you the goods of hormones. Hormones prevent cancer. Like progesterone prevents cancer of the uterus, prevents atrophy, dryness, incontinence, prevents osteoporosis, fractures and death, prevents Alzheimer's. And now, recently, this year, it's shown that the lack of estrogen even adversely affects men. And in Yale and Kentucky research, it shows that the hormones prevent heart attacks and strokes. So here's atrophy. And you see on the left, 17-year-old has 4 layers in the vagina, nice and juicy, no problems. But a 17-year-old on the left loses those 4 layers, and it's down to the nerve and blood vessel layer. You have vaginal dryness, the vagina shrinks, you have a lot of pain, discord, it leads to divorces, breaks up the family life, and all you have to do, now again I gotta thank and give Dr. Shintani back a gift. Dr. Shintani, if you'll pay attention to this, because you have a program now about reversing aging. And this is physical reversal of aging, where if you get a little bit of estrogen, just a smidgen of estrogen once a week, those 4 layers will come back and you're actually getting younger, okay? The lack of hormones also cause osteoporosis, fractures, and the last 2 years it's been shown that more American women have died of fractures than have died from cancer. Research at Columbia, if you look on the little bar graph on the left, shows that the presence of estrogen can prevent Alzheimer's. And this newest complaint is about falling estrogens even affect males. And now on the mainland at major university centers, when you're diagnosed with breast cancer, the first thing they give you is estrogen. And you try to tell somebody in Hawaii that and they don't believe you, but we're in another era of medicine. This is an example of research that shows that the research can be imperfect unless the investigator knows his subject thoroughly. You see the word medroxyprogesterone there? Medroxyprogesterone is not progesterone. It blocks the receptors so estrogen can't do it. So in all the research that you read where you're giving estrogens with medroxyprogesterone, you're actually blocking estrogen. And of course, their results reflect this, but they can't explain it because they don't know medroxyprogesterone is like creating a situation where there's no estrogen. Again, I have to find a simple way to explain this to my patients. You know how estrogen produces very soft skin? And you hear arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. The estrogen makes the arteries, I think, more elastic, and it prevents heart disease. So our old findings that hormones prevent heart attacks, are good for the cardiovascular system, and prevent cancers is correct. So in summary, in this regard, it's animals, it's meats, not hormones, stupid, that cause these problems. And as I said before, I'll explain the mechanism. You eat a lot of meats, you get obesity, adipose tissue, makes androstenedione, makes excess estrogen, and it upsets the estrogen-progesterone ratio, and it actually blocks the progesterone, and no progesterone leads to cancer. So in conclusion, 3 things. Prevention is the only thing that counts. You want to prevent serious illnesses, because when you're sick, you can't do things, right? When you're sick, you can't perform the way you can when you're healthy. It's common sense. Number 2, as far as I know now, from what I'm seeing, meats do everything bad and nothing good. And I'm still willing to learn. I invite anyone who can tell me a single reason why anybody should eat meats. You should do the research yourself. Don't believe anybody. And then another conclusion now is that fresh pineapple has all the benefits in the world, and we should do this. Now, the other ridiculous thing in talking to my patients, I say, you know, if you eat meats, if you eat animals, there's only 3 or 4 animals you eat, right? One with the feathers, pigs, cows, but there's millions of plants to eat. Why aren't we eating the plants? And you know the story of Noah's Ark? God put together all these animals. He didn't want animals eating each other. I don't want to be eaten by animals. But now this last slide says it all. Look at what this says. Disease prevention. Disease prevention, and what does it show? Plants. That's a secret of good health. Thank you very much.
about not eating meat. Do we know what that was based on? Was it Buddhist?
No, the Japanese are very smart. They knew that meats and fish were not good, but they did not know why. Now we should know why. The dioxin is one of the reasons, and there's other reasons which I've already mentioned. So they knew it was bad. You were arrested if you got caught eating meats or fish. So they did not know why, but now we should know why.
They were aware of the health?
Yes, definitely. And it was my impression that in Japan, there was little or no breast cancer, no prostate cancer, no heart attack or stroke. And still, in real Japan, out in the countries, it's still that way. I do not consider Tokyo part of real Japan because it's very foreign invested, right?
You mentioned chlorine quite a bit. Is the chlorine in swimming pools that destructive to you, or is it simply chlorine in foods that you were talking about?
Well, I don't think we are meant to ingest the chlorine in the swimming pools, but the chlorine atom makes for halogenated hydrocarbons, and that's where the danger is. DDT or PCBs, it's all the same.
Yeah, I guess my question is, does it go through the skin? Does it go through the skin? Does it permeate the skin?
I can't answer that question because I haven't done research on it. Okay. That's a good question. I'll have to look that up. Well, I'll be glad to answer questions now. If David will come up, Dr. Harris needs to have a thumb drive made. I'll be staying around to answer your questions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lorrin Lau, for a really wonderful talk. I learned a lot tonight. We're also offering some delicious vegan samples donated by the generosity of Down to Earth, and it's over the kitchen to my right. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and have a safe return home tonight. Good night, everyone.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.